So it just monitored that. That's, can you turn your?
Okay.
I know, it's such responsibility.
It's me, it's me, it's me. Oh, I turned it off. It's not me.
I'm not even on yet.
I
Somehow, Daniel, she's
All right, good morning, everyone. It's June 10th, 2021, and this is the Law and Policy Committee meeting of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Ms. Linker, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Baker? Here. Chair Matich?
Here. Now proceed to item number 1, public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have any public comment? Hearing and seeing none, proceed to item number 2, approval of the May 11th, 2021 committee minutes. Commissioner Baker, any edits or comments?
No edits or comments. Move to approve.
Second, Ms. Linker.
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Moving right along to item 3, our legislative update. Ms. Nakano, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you both in person. My update will follow the staff memo attached to today's agenda, but I will also point out a couple new updates that occurred after the agenda was posted. And I'll start with updates on the Commission's priority bills. There's a new update for AB 236 by Assemblymember Berman relating to LLC disclosure. AB 236 was ordered to the inactive file by the author last Thursday, June 3rd. That means that SB 686 by Assemblymember Glazer will be moving forward as the vehicle for the Commission's proposal relating to LLC disclosure. And SB 686 passed in the Senate last week, 32-6, and I'm pleased to report that it was passed with bipartisan support, with Senator Ochoa Bogue voting aye. The committee has expressed interest and support in amendments that would change the thresholds for inclusion on an LLC's statement of members to shorten the look-back period from 2 calendar years to possibly 2 calendar quarters, and change the monetary threshold from $1,000 in cumulative capital contributions to $5,000 or $10,000 in cumulative capital contributions. Additionally, the California Chamber of Commerce who was the only entity in formal opposition to the bill, agreed to remove their opposition if those amendments were made, and if the portion of the bill codifying two regulations relating to LLCs was removed from the bill. Staff on SB 686 has indicated that Senator Glazer is open to these changes, and I anticipate there may be amendments possibly as soon as next week. Committee staff has indicated some interest in a slightly longer look-back period, longer than 2 calendar quarters, possibly 1 year, which is, of course, still shorter than the current 2 calendar years in the existing bill. And I'll pause here if there's any questions on SB 686.
Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. I do have one, and thank you for the update. It is good to see everyone in person. I'm grateful for that. Do we have even draft amendments in print at all to see, or are you anticipating that getting them in print is still to happen?
I think committee staff has submitted draft requests to Ledge Council with a few different versions, so I don't think they know exactly which one they'll land on yet, but they have requested language.
Okay, so we haven't seen the actual drafts, any of those 3 drafts yet?
Not
or
yet.
Multiple options. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Nakano, sticking with the LLC bill, SB 686, is the last day for amendments to that bill, is that September 3rd, or is that a different date?
I think it'll be a little bit before. Ideally, it will be 7 days before it's heard in committee. So that hasn't been set in the Assembly committee yet, but 7 days prior to the hearing is when they'd like to see amendments. So ideally sooner rather than later, but it is possible to amend later. It's just not ideal.
Okay. I'm just trying to think in terms of timing of when those amendments come in and when the next opportunity would be for the Commission, having had the opportunity to review those amendments, to express our views on the amended bill.
Okay.
If I may, and I think that's a good point, that their opportunities arise and they are sometimes very, very late. Of course, the 72-hour rule is probably the biggest one that overhangs folks, but having them dealt with, and I think this is a fiscal bill, if I remember correctly, there's a fiscal impact to it. If we, as a commission, had a goal of looking more at the August 27th, so for fiscal committees to meet and report bills out, to at least get those adopted by the committee, I think we'd want to aim no later than that time period, rather than hope that it happens on the floor, because those other dates are basically when they're on the Senate floor, and that would make me nervous if we could avoid that.
Okay.
All right. Good.
Okay, moving on to other priority bills. AB 378, which would remove gendered language in several areas of state law, including the Political Reform Act, was heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee and passed on consent. AB 1367, which would increase the maximum penalty for egregious personal use of campaign funds, passed in the Assembly 7820, also, of course, with bipartisan support. And AB 1367 originally included an additional proposal that would require recipient committees to maintain a single campaign bank account for all contributions and expenditures. I previously mentioned in a past meeting we had some questions and concerns from stakeholders, so that piece was removed from the bill with the intent that we would try to answer questions, address concerns, and put it back in at a later date. Staff has met with stakeholders. We're continuing discussions. We're still gathering information, but we're hopeful that we'll have a proposal to put back in the bill this session. AB 1590, the Assembly Elections Committee bill that includes the Commission's proposal transferring the duty to collect the penalty for failure to pay the annual committee fee from GC to SOS, passed in the Assembly last month and was referred to the Senate Elections Committee. In the other commission-related bills section in the report, I won't go over all of the bills, but I wanted to add that both the Senate and Assembly are self-imposing a 12-bill limit per member this year. So because of that, members are starting to cut their bill packages down, and we're seeing that play out here with some of these bills. As noted in the report, AB 975, which includes the proposal that would allow electronic filing for statements of economic interests, was ordered to the inactive file, and also a new update for AB 40, which relates to slate mailer disclosures. That bill was also ordered to the inactive file by the author. And one additional update for other commission-related bills that occurred after this report was posted. SB 752, relating to disclosure requirements for electronic ads, passed in the Senate 35-0. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Commissioner Baker, any questions? Ms. Nakano, SB 752, you said that just passed out of the Senate?
Yes.
And so now that's heading over to the Assembly, right?
Correct.
The Commission has yet to take a position on that bill. Is it your sense that would be, at this time, it'd be appropriate for us to look at that bill and consider taking a position on it at the July Commission meeting?
I think that would be appropriate. I'm waiting to hear back from the author's office about some of the concerns that we had with the bill, or staff had with the bill, as well as some possible amendments. So hopefully they will be in touch shortly, and I should be hearing from them in the next week or so.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything further, Ms. Nakano?
That's all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now proceed to item number 4. This is a discussion of proposed regulatory changes for electronic media advertisements. And with us today is Commission Counsel Torrin Lewis. Morning, Mr. Lewis.
Chair Matich and Commissioner Baker. If you'll give me one moment, please, I will bring up my screen so that you can see some visuals, because I know Commissioner Baker had requested that. Use those again.
Yeah, thank you for that.
All right, can everyone now see the PowerPoint slide that says paid influencer post about a candidate or measure?
Yes.
Excellent. So to recap, today will be the first time that we're sharing regulation language after the Commission instructed us at the April Commission meeting to come back with some draft regulatory proposals related to campaign communications and advertisement disclosure under the Act. Specifically, I want to highlight 3 proposed changes. 2 are amendments to existing regulations, and 1 is an entirely new regulation. The goals of all of these proposed changes broadly are, first, to ensure proper disclosure in cases where a committee pays a third party, such as a social media influencer, to post campaign ads or other communications online. And secondly, to clarify how those disclosures should be displayed, including for certain other types of online advertisements where there's currently a lack of clarity. So for example, on video ads posted to social media. So with those goals in mind, I'll give a quick overview of the proposed regulatory changes and adoption of the new regulation, and I'm happy to pause at any point for questions, and we can refer to the visuals if that's helpful. So the first proposed change, or set of changes rather, are multiple changes to the so-called blogger regulation. The first of which is that staff proposes updating this regulation to better address the expansion of platforms on which paid content now more frequently appears. So when this blogger regulation came into existence, really it was contemplated to address, as its nickname suggests, the increase in commentary on political blogs. Since then, of course, and I believe this was in 2013 when that was originally promulgated, we of course have seen an explosion of all different manner of types of online communications, from Twitter to Facebook and YouTube and so forth, which play an increasing role in our elections. And so that's the first change, is really just updating the language to reflect that reality. The second change to the blogger regulation is expanding its heightened expenditure reporting requirements. And so this is a change to the campaign reporting requirements to include more specific information about paid online communication. So that would include paid social media posters' usernames or handles, or, for example, the title and author of an op-ed paid for by a committee. And so again, this is a change to the existing expenditure reporting requirements of the blogger reg. But these heightened reporting requirements themselves are not new. So a related point is that at the April Commission meeting, both Chair Matich and Commissioner Wood instructed us to come back with some language regarding or addressing the practice of amplification. And so broadly speaking, these are measures taken by a committee to increase the viewership of a communication, or to give the appearance of greater support or opposition to a communication. And so we have included in this packet before you some draft language that would, through increased expenditure reporting under the blogger reg, capture more information related to this practice of amplification. And the fourth change to the blogger regulation that's before you today is there is a provision of the existing blogger regulation that permits a committee to opt out of the extra expenditure reporting if the committee ensures that on the communication itself is a disclosure statement. But this disclosure that is permitted to be used in lieu of this extra expenditure reporting under the blogger reg is not necessarily consistent with the disclosure requirements of the Disclose Act, where a communication falls under this reg, but also meets the definition of an advertisement under the Act. And so we've included some language that would harmonize the two by stating that if a communication that falls under this reg also meets the definition of an advertisement under the Act, that the Disclose Act advertising disclosure rules will control in that situation. So I'll pause there to see if you have any questions before moving on to the other proposed changes.
Commissioner Baker, do you have any questions?
I don't have a question, but and it can be here or later. Would like to have a discussion about the amplification language and proposal, and I'll just lay it out there. I'm not there yet that we need to have a requirement that there be further disclosure of when that's amplified. I don't think I'm opposed to it, but I think it is such a change, and I'm going to be very interested in where where the analogies are that we already regulate in a way very similar. I'm trying to think of a campaign that chooses to have its signs bigger, or on the busiest street corner, or with the brightest colors that are supposed to get attention, and they're spending money on that. We don't regulate that any differently. But this is there an analogy here where if you're trying to amplify either likes or make your post appear higher in the news feed that someone may have, that's where I'm seeing amplification that we're talking about. Is where's the analogy to what we already regulate, and why would this be treated differently? So I guess I'm going through a thought process on that, because I appreciate that we are exploring it. I'm very hesitant about adopting new regulations on that before we've looked a little bit more about where else we have done something similar. So not a question, but expressing both a concern and a hope that we'll get more information on that.
So sticking with amplification, because I actually had a couple questions and comments on that section as well. The first question I had is, Mr. Lewis, can you can you walk us through how does it work when a committee wants to amplify a particular political advertisement? Are they, when they want to do that, are they paying for a specific number of likes, retweets, or what have you? Or is there a different arrangement? What is your research uncovered? Can we start with just kind of the logistics of how it works?
Sure, with the caveat that I'm by no means an expert in this, having really been clued onto this at the April meeting myself. My understanding, based on our research, is that there's a couple ways one could, as a committee, amplify one's communication. One is to literally buy, or I should back up. One is to hire a firm, and that firm would provide what are essentially fake likes and fake followers. And so it would be buying the committee a veneer of support that, at least to the ordinary person's mind, does not actually exist. I don't have data as to how frequently this occurs in the campaign space. That's something we could look into, but that we know that's one technique. Another technique would be actually, as Commissioner Baker suggested, hiring a firm to, much less nefariously, just boost the message of the committee through identifying key influencers and such, who would then, for example, retweet their messages. So it can take a variety of forms, and really the ones we've focused on, I believe, in this reg text, is the ones that give a veneer of support or opposition where it is not necessarily there, and where the current expenditure reporting would not provide the public with a lot of information about, what XYZ consulting services being paid $1,000, on a campaign report was actually for.
All right. So based on what you just said, it sounds like, because you mentioned firms, consultants, this is in the nature of essentially a professional service then. If a committee wants to amplify its message, it engages a firm that specializes in this type of service, and they do it. Do you have a sense of what the range of expenditures is like for amplification? Is this are these firms charging, $100, $10,000? Like what are the dollars that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I actually did come across some numbers. I'm struggling to recall them now, but I think it struck me as quite cheap, something to the effect of 100, it was like $1 per follower, or perhaps even less. And I think, to be clear, this is reportedly a widespread practice outside of the electoral context. And so it's not clear to me whether candidates or committees who would do this would seek out people who don't necessarily only do this for campaign, or whether, but there certainly are firms you can find just by doing a Google search who advertise these types of services.
So what's the threshold of expenditures that would be subject to this reporting requirement? Like how much do you have to spend in amplification before you even have a basic obligation to report?
So we are not changing the expenditure. I guess it would depend on who is doing it, but so it would be the same expenditure reporting thresholds as for any other committee. We're not creating any new expenditure reporting threshold, if that makes sense.
So $100 is the threshold?
Correct.
Okay. So how, kind of going back now to Commissioner Baker's point, which I think is a good one, it's what are the analogies? If I'm a committee and I want to amplify my lawn signs, for example. I may engage a graphic designer to make them look snazzier so they capture people's attention, right? If currently under our regs, if I'm a committee and I engage the services of a graphic designer and I pay him more than $100, I report that, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So in that sense, it's the concept of reporting expenditures for amplification services is similar to what we would do with a graphic designer or, frankly, any other type of professional service that a committee may engage. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's right, with the idea being that there are some unique interests where simply reporting the name of the vendor in the absence of this language wouldn't capture the nature of the activity going on.
Right. No, I agree with that. And so I agree with that. And so the question is, rather than having a blanket professional services category that would be reported in the expenditures, do we want to have something that's a little more precise? And instead of professional services, maybe it's professional services - amplification. To me, that certainly seems like a very reasonable thing to require. I think the portion of this that I have some question about is in paragraphs 1 and 2, where there's additional information like a specific number of likes, retweets, etc. If I paid a professional services, if I paid a graphic designer to help me get my message out there more in terms of my lawn signs, I mean, I don't have to get that granular with how many more people are we trying to reach, or which audience am I trying to reach with it, right? So I think that's where there is we are breaking, it seems to me, some new ground with respect to how we're approaching amplification as a type of service that committees may use. Is that fair?
I think that's right, and obviously General Counsel Bainbridge can jump in here if he disagrees, but my sense is we as staff are totally, we don't have a strong view as to how this must be accomplished, and so we're all ears in how the Commission thinks this would best be done.
All right. Commissioner Baker, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. If you mentioned how perhaps on Facebook, for example, or any other social media platform, that campaigns and individuals can pay to boost their message. And there's been changes to how much you can target that over the last few years. Both the platforms have changed their policy, but let's just say it's a scenario where a campaign expends funds to not only do a advertisement on Facebook, but they boost it. Mm-hmm. And how is that disclosed now other than an expenditure to make a Facebook ad? We don't currently require the campaign to disclose that it was specifically to boost a message as opposed to we just spent this amount ads or had this expenditure, do we?
My understanding is that that's correct, yeah. And I think part of the challenge is that this regulation, the so-called blogger regulation 18421.5, really was designed to get at communications that don't squarely fit under the definition of an advertisement. So, there could be certainly more room to do more on this area outside of this specific regulation.
And I guess where as I'm articulating my concern, hopefully better, is where we as an agency start to get into the role of curating the content, as opposed to disclosing what your expenditures are, that we're not trying to also say one is better than the other, one is more of concern than the other and deserves more scrutiny. I don't know that our role is to curate it beyond here's how campaigns are being transparent about what they're spending their money on so that the public has that information. And as I'm reading this, that was my concern, that we are becoming a content curator, or even here's a practice that we think a campaign should do and should not do. And secondly, I'm also looking at the practical implications of how this would be reported. Again, I'm focusing just on the amplification. You know, I'm thinking of the 24-hour period where contributions are coming in, but there's also very close to campaigns, they will have a lot of expenditures at the last minute. And we won't see what those expenditures are until well after an election, for example, because the last report of a cycle is typically after the election day. And if we are trying to be transparent and in the moment so that the public has information about if ads or messages are boosted or amplified, that ship has sailed if the election is already over and it doesn't show up on a report until much later. So I am concerned about us becoming a curator of boosts and amplifications where we're really not needing to make a normative judgment about whether they're right. And if we're looking for, if the world needs more transparency about what is boosted, what is a bot, what is amplified, if the disclosure forms are the way to do it. And I raise those again. Socratic questions for us. Those are the ones I'm thinking through.
Can I ask a question? Is the concern about curating the content, I hadn't considered the approach that we're taking as being content-based. I considered it more service-based, just as I alluded to earlier, where campaigns pay for a variety of services, and for a long time, we require them to report those services. So why is it that regulating this type of service crosses the line into curating content?
Where I'm starting to feel that it is because if we're saying, if you're amplifying it, we're saying because you were trying to make something look like it was liked more. I mean, this was the commentary, is that it's that it's liked more than it organically might be liked, or it has more traffic on it than it otherwise would have on the natural. I feel like we're selecting out for further disclosure, certainly an attempt, but then even in content, something that's liked more and has more positive views, that they're trying to generate that. That's why it sounds like curating to me. I guess I can't say the content that this person should be elected, or this lawn sign was more bright in colors, and so we're picking it. And that's why this is different. We're kind of targeting attempts to tell the public that something is liked more than it may naturally be. And I feel like that's different than what we do in just requiring a disclosure of how you spend your money.
I don't know. When you say it like that, it actually makes me think that that's more reason why we want the public to know. I think we want them to know that the campaigns are engaged in this type of activity. I think, but I feel very strongly we shouldn't be regulating the content at all.
Well, aren't we? If we're basically, I mean, I can't imagine that the technology is out there for another campaign, the opponent's side, to hire someone to make nasty comments. Maybe they can't. I don't know. Mean comments or disfavor or dislike a campaign, unfollow, or are we going to be treating that as exactly the same so that we're not favoring one over the other? But I do see a distinction between just disclosing, here's your expenditure on advertisements, whether the advertisement was to boost or to gin up more followers and likes. I don't know that that's something that we are the ones that should be saying. We want to make sure there's transparency in how campaign funds are spent and where they go. But when we get into like a normative judgment on what's favorable and what's not favorable, I think we're starting to get close to curating. And I'm clearly still working on that. It wasn't technology that I used, so I just had likes on organic.
So, all right. I mean, I see it as paying for a service. It's hard for me to see how it's a normative value, because Mr. Lewis, maybe you can just help me understand this. If I wanted to drive up the number of likes for an unfavorable post about my opponent, that would still be subject to this regulation, right? I mean, it's not just favorable. I mean, it's across the board. If you engage the services of an amplification firm, you'd be reporting it no matter what the content was, right?
That's correct.
If I may,
Please,
I'll throw out this idea. go back to the boosting example. Right now, if a campaign pays for Facebook ads or pays to have somebody design a post that will be put on Facebook, and then they also expend, which is relatively cheap to do, funds to boost something, to try to reach more people or target them more, that is not disclosed from what I mentioned earlier. It is, I spent money on this. And I am for more information. I do want the electorate to know it's great if something is bot generated or artificial likes. It's just if disclosures in this agency is the one to do it. That's my underlying question. So how are you seeing that as different?
Yeah, I think to me, that's more of a question of, is this the right place to put the amplification regulation? Because I think it's a good point that if you buy a Facebook ad, and as part of that purchase, you are also purchasing amplification services. I think it's a fair point to say, well, that should be highlighted just as much as when you hire an independent firm to engage in amplification services. So it's not unique to this blogger reg, and it makes me think maybe we would have a standalone reg on amplification across different types of media.
Well, do you see? Question for myself and you both. Do you see the boost, which is not necessarily going to generate more likes, as an amplification, as opposed to I'm targeting now? And if it's just not targeting, why aren't we trying to get into the rope in more things like, oh, hey, by the way, you have to disclose that you targeted voters, and then which voters did you target, and at what point are we taking a campaign strategy and laying it out for the other side?
Yeah, and I think to that point, I think that's why I have some lingering question about paragraphs 1 and 2, because those get more to the precise who are you targeting, which could lead to why. But I think just the straight up question of, are you paying a firm to provide this service to you? I think that's fair game and very consistent with what we've done before. I think the question that you've raised in my mind is whether or not this is the right place for that, because it's broader than just the blogger. It applies to different media as well. What do you think, Mr. Lewis? What's the answer?
Well, one thing that came to mind that maybe this is a good place to highlight again, which was in the memo, is the other way that we kind of skirted over that the commission might choose to highlight this information for the public is to actually make changes to the codes on the campaign forms or add more informative codes, say to Schedule E on Form 460. Of course, as we noted there, at this very moment, the Secretary of State's office, which oversees the online campaign filing, is in the middle of rolling out their new system. And so unclear whether that's an avenue to pursue at this very moment, but it is another route that's possible.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I had questions on other portions of the reg as well, but if you have more on amplification.
No, I think and I'm seeing your point. We do want to be consistent in what we require to be disclosed and how it's being spent. I'm looking at a bit of a domino effect and what were the analogies. I'm going to keep working on those while you ask your other good questions.
All right. So going to page 1, and I'm looking at 18421.5, we are adding some new language to the reg in paragraph A, web application, digital application, and my question to you is very basic. Do we define that anywhere, either in the regs, or is that defined in the Act anywhere?
That is a great question. I do not know off the top of my head. I do not believe so. I do not believe those terms are defined, but I'd have to double check.
Okay. And so I was going to ask the same question about amplification measures, if that term is defined anywhere. I assume it's not, because it's kind of a new concept even for us to consider.
That's right. Our thinking was essentially that subdivision D of the reg itself was more or less defining it for our purpose.
Yeah. Well, I do think that staff ought to consider if we need and would benefit from having some more precise definitions in the regs for these terms that we're using. I think it's fair to the regulated community that they ought to know what we mean, and what I think might be a digital application they may not think is such. So I think we should think about what are some good definitions, mindful, of course, that we don't want those definitions to be so limited, because, of course, we're trying to be forward-looking, particularly when it comes to technology. So, but I will leave that to your good hands, Mr. Lewis, to square that circle for us. But I do think we need some definitions there. And then if you could just help me understand, I'm looking at pages 2 and page 3. I think you covered this before, but just if you could help me out. I'm looking at paragraph E and then paragraph I. And paragraph E says paid advertisements placed on the internet by the recipient committee that are purchased at regular price are not subject to additional reporting under this reg. And then in I, communication that meets the definition of, now we're quoting advertisement under a particular section, that these requirements are not applicable. And so can you just kind of walk us through how those two square up?
Yeah, so this is the existence of both of these, I and E, are due to the fact that Regulation 184215 was initially passed prior to the existence of the Disclose Act. And so in the case of E, I think the thinking at that time was that there were other mechanisms for disclosure, and that the paid advertisement process lent itself to disclosure better than these communications that didn't meet the definition of an advertisement. I think what we sought to do with I is to be very clear, now that we're living in a post-Disclose Act world, that in the case of communications that meet the definition of advertisements under the Disclose Act, or under our existing, I should say, advertising disclosure regime, this regulation is not doing away with or somehow creating some sort of exception for communications that fall under this reg, but also happen to meet the definition of an advertisement. And so we went with over-inclusivity, or making sure we had coverage here under both, versus delineating that there's some world that some third option in that case. So
thank you. So I understand I understand the purpose of I. E, I'm still struggling with, because when you use the term ad, and part of it is we're using the term advertisements in two different places, and I think we mean two different things. So when you say paid advertisement under E,
mm-hmm.
Are you talking about advertisements that are defined anywhere in the Act, or is that something different?
I would actually have to look at the reg history at that time to see what the commission contemplated with respect to E. What I can say is that, again, at that time, there was no Disclose Act. And so my assumption was they were trying to capture whatever was going on at that time. And for example, the language purchased at regularly published rates, I think that's not something that we basically what I'm saying is I think this definition, this section here, is unique to what they were trying to accomplish with the blogger regulation at the time, and to differentiate between two types of activity. And so really the blogger reg was aimed at communications that didn't fall under the definition of an advertisement, and E was written to clarify that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but the short answer is I think I need to do some more digging in the regulatory history to better understand the specifics of the language used in E.
Well, no, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Lewis. I think Mr. Bainbridge is grabbing his microphone, so I think he has something to add.
Yeah, I'll add to that. What E is there for is to clarify that this reg doesn't apply anytime you purchase an advertisement on the internet. There was some concern at the time that this would be an over-inclusive regulation. If you look at subdivision A, it's focused on this reporting when a person pays a person to provide favorable or unfavorable content about a candidate or ballot measure. So it's intended to capture the situation where someone's being paid to put out good information about a candidate, and it's not clear on its face necessarily that the person was being paid to say it. It's actually intended to look like the person saying it is saying it on their own, not that they've been paid to say it. So that's what this regulation is capturing, that sort of activity. Subdivision E is there to explain this doesn't mean anytime you buy a banner ad on the internet, this regulation is going to apply.
I appreciate that. I think that clarifies it a bit. I do still think, and I'm happy to be told otherwise by other folks, but it does seem to me that we are using, whenever, and this is true sort of writ large, whenever we use the same term, but in a more specific way in one portion of a reg and maybe in a different way in a different portion of the reg, I think it's incumbent on us to be very clear what we mean. And so I think perhaps E could be clarified a bit so that everybody understands what you just described, Mr. Bainbridge.
Okay, we'll take a look at that.
Commissioner Baker, I don't know. Feel free to tell me I'm all wrong.
It's a great point, and I think you're right. So, yes, especially when it's applied elsewhere. I'm glad you noticed that. Be very helpful to get that clear.
All right. All right, so we'll add that to the list. All right, those were all my questions at this point on this regulation. Did you have anything further, Commissioner Baker?
Not on this one, thank you.
All right, Mr. Lewis, thank you very much.
Certainly. So,
go ahead and proceed.
Okay, so moving along, the second set of regulatory changes before you is it's come to our attention that there was some confusion as to which rule applies to video advertisements posted to social media. And so what we've sought to do with the amendments to 18450.4 is to clarify that a video posted on social media must include the disclosures required for video advertisements under the Act generally, and that means disclosures on the video and not just on the committee's profile or landing page. So I'm not sure if there's any questions about this one before we move on to the proposed new regulation.
Commissioner Baker, any?
I did not, thank you.
All right, I'm good. Please proceed, Mr. Lewis.
Okay, so the next proposal is a proposed new regulation. And this regulation would do two things. One, it would provide that a post on a non-social media website that is not the committee's website has to have disclosures at the top or bottom of the individual post, as opposed to the top or bottom of the individual page of the individual website. So again, top or bottom of the individual post as opposed to the website. And this is really just applying the rule found in section 84504.3D of the Act. So this would be, if you're looking at the draft text, little a of the regulation 18450.9. The second thing this proposed new regulation would do is, in a situation where an influencer is paid by a committee to post an advertisement on social media, it would require that influencer to tag or somehow link back to the committee in that post. And that way, viewers can actually click and link back to the committee's profile or landing page to view the disclosure required under the Act. And with that, happy to answer any questions about that new regulation as well, those two provisions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. And I think I'm renewing a comment that, and I will be interested in hearing public comment on this, a comment that I made earlier, that when you tag someone, it doesn't necessarily make that association. The viewer has to go and make another step to click on it and go to a landing page, which I don't think will happen. It may be that this is the most straightforward and simple way, instead of really messing with the content, to do it as a tag. But I just think we need to be realistic that there are limitations to what that will really accomplish. If our goal is to get the disclosure information out there, tags are done for different reasons, and I don't know that it'll have that effect of getting the disclosure out there should the viewer not choose to click on it and land on a landing page. It might also have the effect of increasing traffic to that the whoever's tagged, and we might be getting in the business of suggesting or inadvertently helping someone with their traffic. I know that's not our intent. I don't really actually have a concern about that, but the first one is there's a limitation to how much we're really disclosing by tagging. It'd be nice if I came up with a better option, but that's something I think we need to be very mindful of as we look at this. The better options that I tried to come up with all got very complex with how much information you were then requiring in a post.
Well, Mr. Lewis, remind me, but I think, isn't the reason that we have informally advised and are proposing to codify in this regulation the tagging option is because under the current language in the Disclose Act, we can't require more than that?
That's correct.
So, I mean, we're a little limited, I should say, in what we can do under the current statute, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. But I agree with Commissioner Baker. I think it's I think it is the best that we can do under our existing authority, but it's not satisfactory in terms of, like, maximum disclosure or,
Yeah.
Right. I don't have.
It's an imperfect solution.
It is an imperfect solution, correct. All right. Any further questions or comments on this reg?
No, thank you.
All right. Mr. Lewis, anything further from you?
That's all. Thank you.
All right. Well, I would say that I see that we've received some digital public comment. Why don't we go ahead and pause for a second and see if we have any public comment on the phone lines on this item. Hearing none. Mr. Lewis or Mr. Bainbridge, you guys can choose who answers it, but have we received any stakeholder input on this reg from CPAA or other groups that are normally interested in what we do here?
I'm not aware of any. Torrin, have you heard from anybody on this reg?
I have not.
All right. Commissioner Baker?
And this may be putting our good communications director too much on the spot. So I'm wondering if we've received much in the way of, over the last several months, maybe last 6 months, many media calls or questions about it, or people trying to find information on this, if that's something that's popped up. Looking for interest level.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioner Baker. Yeah, I have had a few calls and emails here and there regarding the overall topic of influencers and what are our thoughts on it. I wouldn't say it's been an overwhelming number, but there have been some, and ancillary issues as well, like app-based things. All the major technology changes that have been coming at the task force has been talking about as well. So there has been some.
It doesn't, what I'm hearing also is that you don't see it as there's a particular spike or there's been is that average that you would think? And the reason I'm asking is, this is one that if there's interested people, if we take an extra step of having more engagement for feedback.
Well, I would say the media is interested in it. They have expressed it, and I think mainly that is because it is a new phenomenon.
Okay.
So it's difficult to compare that with something from 5 or 6 years ago, but it is relatively new, and yes, we have had calls.
Thank you.
All right, anything further on this item? All right, and this will be presented to the full commission. Mr. Bainbridge, can you remind me, that's this next week, correct?
Yeah, it's up for pre-notice for the June meeting next week.
Excellent. All right. All right, moving to item number 5, discussion of items for the July 2021 committee meeting. Mr. Bainbridge, sticking with you to help me with my memory, behested payments. My recollection is we're going to have a report back from staff on behested payments at that meeting.
Yeah, that's right. In July, we'll have draft language that will be for pre-notice at the July commission meeting, so we'll have that in advance for the law and policy meeting.
All right, thank you.
We'll also have, I think the plan is to have a presentation from 1 or 2 people that work in the nonprofit world that could maybe provide just some background information on how they do things and what some of the rules are that they're dealing with and what their experience has been with behested payments. So we have people who have tentatively agreed to, and I'm talking about the commission meeting here, to brief the commission on that topic.
Right. I think that would be very helpful for the commissioners to hear from folks in the nonprofit world to get a better understanding of the logistics of behested payments. And then also, of course, we'll have Ms. Nakano reporting back on legislation. Commissioner Baker, was there anything in addition to those 2 items that you were hoping to have on the July agenda?
And it may already be, I know we brought it up, I think at the last commission meeting was a request for a report on maybe the opting in or opting out of automatic contributions. You had raised that, and I'm visualizing it at the last commission meeting. Is that one that will come to law and policy, or will it go directly to the commission next? Mr.
Bainbridge, what's the timing on staff having something to present to the commission?
We're currently in the process of looking at the options of what the commission could do through regulation. So I guess I leave it up to your direction. They're only a week apart, so whether we do it at law and policy or the commission meeting, we can have something together. We'll see what sort of options there are for the commission. This is a little outside of from what we found so far, is sort of outside of what the commission typically does, but we're looking at things and trying to figure out ways that we might be able to have some effect on how people make contributions in this arena.
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead? It sounds like that's not a no. And so why don't we go ahead and add it to the agenda for July, report back from staff on the recurring contribution issue that we raised at the last meeting.
Both with the commission meeting or just at LC?
Both.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anything further on item number 5? All right. Well, at this point, I will go ahead and make a motion to adjourn. Do you have a second?
Second.
Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right. Thank you, everyone.